Just tell you one lovely thing that John Moller said. The first time I met him and I interviewed him, it was like about 2005, 4, something like that. And I said to him, so when you first met George Lucas, what did he say he wanted? Because you had this massive project to undertake, something that ultimately won him an Oscar. And I said, so what did he actually say he wanted you to do? And he said, well, he just described it as cowboys versus Nazis. You talk about history books. If we're going to be historians, we've always got to be able to prove something rather than just by taking their word for it.
Unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is going to be speculation and what you can get from looking at the pieces themselves.
Potentially, could it have been Ainsworth's idea to ram the Stormtrooper face into an X-Wing helmet?
It could have been anybody's idea, couldn't it? And that's the thing.
Hey guys, welcome back. This time we're going to delve into the history of one of the kind of lesser known Star Wars helmets. Yeah, the X-Wing helmet. The history of this is kind of patchy at best. So we thought we'd take a look and see what we can actually discover and see what firm facts about the creation of this helmet and by relation the TIE Pilot helmet we could discover.
It's an Air Force helmet, isn't it? APH or something?
The APH-6. Why that helmet? Whose idea was that?
I get the impression that somebody within the production very early on said, right, we'll use this and this and this as our base. So,
and like I said, that helmet does appear in early drawings in Muller's notebook. So I think it was planned to be that helmet for a while.
Maybe John Moller was involved in that, but somebody would have just presented it, right, let's do this, let's use this as the base.
Right. Yeah, it seems like they pulled military stuff from all over the world in. They bought like lots of military crap. It could have just been in there somewhere, who knows.
John Moller did say that they did tend to do that, both for Star Wars and Alien. Rather than try and build something from scratch, you take something and then cut it up and use it as something else. It looked like at one stage they wanted to take that helmet and break it down into chunks in order to make something that was significantly different. Then it looked to me like they ran out of time to do that. So, they kind of went, oh, stuff it, just vac form it and make a couple of changes to it.
The sketches in John Mollo's notebooks clearly show they were considering a number of different military helmets for the rebels. Here we can see the flight deck helmet being considered possibly for the pilot helmet. This panel design influenced the Rebel Fleet Trooper later on. We can also clearly see a theme running through these helmet choices. They are all US Navy helmets. The base for the Rebel Trooper helmet, this flight deck helmet being considered, and the APH-6.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of those things that people have said was sort of Andrew Ainsworth's, the way he kind of made it so that it would work. But then I've shown you the drawings from Mollo's sketchbook that clearly show the Mohawk as a design element going back to the very first publicly shown Star Wars image of the Macquarie drawing of the back of the TIE Pilot. The Mohawk and the ears are there.
Yeah, even on that. I mean, I think, are we right in saying that was the first publicly printed Star Wars image?
It came out in a newspaper magazine in England and in a Newsweek article about science fiction, how science fiction was the new hot thing, and the lead photo was that Macquarie drawing, and that was 1975.
A note in his diary on the 20th of February 1976, so really early on. Remember, he's only been involved in the project for 6 weeks at that point. A question that he asked George Lucas was, can the Imperial pilots have the same helmets as the Stormtroopers, but black? And the answer he got back was yes, and cust. So presumably, as long as you customize them. So they can be black, but they need to be customized to black. So that was the thinking then. They do the TIE pilots as just black versions with greeblies on or something. And then at some point, and I don't know who thought of it, and I know certain people will take credit for it, but at some point somebody said, well, no, actually, you just need the faceplate, add the faceplate to the X-Wing, and you've got something kind of better if you make it slightly bigger.
Do you know what, though? For years, I didn't realise that the TIE and the X-Wing were the same helmet.
Oh, really?
There are probably people watching this video now that have been Star Wars fans for a long time that don't actually appreciate that.
Well, yeah, and they're definitely the same molds too that used. You know, there's one set of helmet molds that was used for both, for sure.
To install the Stormtrooper face in the X-Wing helmet, the distance or the width of the mohawk needed to be increased from just over 40 millimeters up to 80 millimeters. This increases the whole size of the TIE pilot helmet versus the X-Wing helmet. With the addition of the wider front detail, which is obviously a different style, these two differences really make the helmets appear completely different.
So we know that the X-Wing helmets came first.
Right. Yes.
But I guess for me, what we don't know is, were the X-Wing helmets and were the TIE helmets conceived around the same time? Was the Mohawk an addition to allow it to be used for the Imperial helmet as well?
That's going to be all, speculation, because we don't know. We don't have a fact. We don't know. I tend to think that it was, the X-Wing came first, and then it was just sort of adapted into the TIE pilot. I don't think they were developed at the same time necessarily. But I mean, it kind of would follow, if you're designing good pilots and bad pilots, they're going to have a similar look,
Well,
Coke versus Pepsi.
That the helmet was developed and it was reused for the TIE, whether they were developed in conjunction or whether they were developed separately. We've either got some brilliant design going on to save money, or we've got some really good thinking outside of the box.
I think they just decided to do a Mohawk, and that in the end gave them an extra win because they could use it for the time. I think you think they just thought, well, let's do two. And you might well be right. I'm just more cynical than you. I think they stumbled upon it.
Well, that's a curious thing. So how do we get from the X-Wing to the TIE?
Yeah, who knows? And I mean, people do talk a lot, and totally justified about, and I hate to speak about someone who's not here and can't defend themselves, but, people talk a lot about Andrew Ainsworth and how he, embellished this and that. And we all know the stories. And if we don't, please go look it up. But there are, I spoke to him in the early 2000s, and I know Jez did too, before sort of the ego thing and I created everything took place. And there were some nuggets of good information that he would have no reason to lie about at that point. So that's what's so frustrating. It's like, what a great source this guy could be. But unfortunately, it's not what we have at our disposal. Yeah, I mean, he had said, and I'm probably quoting badly just from memories again. So, but, that he had taken, the helmet and shoved the, he basically is the one that came up with the idea for putting the trooper face in the X-Wing helmet and making the TIE pilot. The drawings that Malo has that's obviously the TIE pilot helmet. Unfortunately, there's no date on those pages. So, they do seem to be very early in the development because they're right next to the TIE pilot doodles is a whole page of doodles trying to figure out what the Imperial cog's going to be. So you got to figure that's pretty early on in the game.
One other thing that maybe we can take into consideration here when we're talking about the symmetry between the two pilots and how they may be running in tandem is the chest box and the TIE chest box, and similarities that we see there with the use of the greeblies more than anything. If we disregard the shapes for a moment, you can see they've used the same acrylic kind of tiles. They've used a very similar rocker switch design. They've used the same metal components even.
Yeah, they're kind of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, which is interesting, and that's what if they did just look into the fact that the helmet could be made bigger and you could just shove a stormtrooper face in there, that could be the case. But it's interesting that the chest boxes have got some similarity as well, and the flight suits and the boots and the gloves, and you know, if we're to believe him, he's responsible for that. But on the other side of it, was it Mollo's intention from, you know, much earlier that the pilots were going to be quite similar in their construction? And yet, for me, as a viewer watching it, even years later, you know, not when I was just a toddler, I didn't see those similarities, but I probably saw enough to accept that they were both pilots.
Yeah. I mean, they're definitely so connected. They're so, once you see it, it's like, oh, you can't unsee it. It's so obvious. Like the white, it's like a cowboy. The white guy, the good guy wears the white helmet, and the bad guy wears the black helmet. So, you know, it's kind of interesting the way they did that.
Because I know there's some storyboards with what look like pretty finalised TIE fighter helmets already produced, but I don't know what the dates of those are, because people could have been changing those at the last minute, storyboards. I don't know. You know, just because it's a storyboard doesn't mean to say it was from you know, prior to February 1976. It might have been
exactly. Yeah, it could have been changed right up into filming.
Yeah.
That image there, that the Mohawk's actually been drawn on top of the helmet, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So as they're discussing this helmet, he's drawn the back of it, and then he said, and then if we just put this,
yeah,
then that's going to alleviate the problems.
So that's what it looks like to me. And I think that's all there is, because the rest of it was talking about boots, shoes, Vader, ground, rebels, etc. So that, to me, I think we've kind of found a way around it. And ultimately, yeah, that's what they've done. They've kind of added it to it.
I mean, it is genius. It's absolute genius to add the flat detail, because that allows for the second one for basically for free. They've got a second helmet.
Here's the thing. So you think, I mean, just, it's probably me being cynical. I think they stumbled across. So basically they thought, we'll put a Mohawk on, make it better. And then when they decided to do the tie, somebody then went, actually, why don't we use the back of that rather than the back of the normal Stormtrooper? So I think they just decided to do a Mohawk, and that in the end gave them an extra win because they could use it for the tie. Nick, I think, had done work in the film industry before on props, etc. And he lived next door, almost literally, I think, to Andrew Ainsworth, who had the vat forming facility, which he was doing canoes and garden stuff. And I think Nick went to Andrew and said, look, I've got this project. Do you want to do these things? So I think that's where it was. But the more you look into it, the more you think that probably what happened was the studio plasterers did all the molds, etc. And then they handed them over to Nick and or Andrew, whatever, and they fabricated from them.
Is this a fact that Ainsworth not only vac formed but assembled the helmets as well?
Yeah, that's totally a fact. I don't think anyone disputes that.
The X-Wings and the TIEs.
Yeah, I don't think anyone disputes that, and the troopers. I don't think that's disputed at all.
Maybe now's a good time to mention the prototype X-Wing helmet. I was really conflicted about this helmet. It was sold at auction in 2002 by Andrew Ainsworth. We know that there are these allegedly prototype Stormtrooper helmets. So if you're not familiar with this absolutely disgusting looking Stormtrooper helmet, this was a helmet that was allegedly produced as a prototype for Empire Strikes Back. I think now pretty much everybody agrees that that's not the case, and that this was probably made some years later. And for me, that kind of sullied the reputation of this helmet. And I was trying to prove that it wasn't made for the production of Star Wars.
Somebody's created the sculpt of the mask. It still doesn't point to it being away from the studio, but I don't know. I was really fascinated with that helmet, and I was coming around to the idea that it was fake and that I didn't believe it. But then I saw the image with the face mask and with the visor on it, and that image completely explains why the visor was so big on the X-Wing helmets.
Right, because it kind of meets it.
Yeah, and it's perfect. It fully explains why the visor was so big, even though in the movie we don't see the big visor. It's all up inside the helmet.
Right.
Mostly.
You know, something occurred to me just now as we're talking. That face mask, I don't think there's any sketches of that at all. I don't remember seeing in the Malo notebook. I'll have to go back and look at an X-Wing helmet with a face mask. So if there is no drawing of that, that points to the fact that Andrew Ainsworth was just freestyling and seeing if it would work, which points to him doing more than just being a hired vac former and assembler.
So Jay went back, checked through his notes, and he sent me this image, and it does indeed show that the face mask is in John Molo's notebooks.
That's interesting, because while I was researching it through books, reference books and information that we can find now, I guess you would call them history books, there was a mention that George discounted using the mouthpiece quite early on, which kind of contradicts the fact that they went ahead and made the piece. But if we look
depends what you mean early on, though. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah. It depends what you mean by early on, because we're looking there at these photographs. Might well have been March '76, maybe even February. I don't know. Possibly.
Well, if we go back to the storyboards, we can see in the storyboards they have got the mouthpiece, the mask piece there. That was initially in the storyboards. That does change later on.
Small clues, you have to kind of connect the dots. I don't know.
No, for sure. That was the whole point of us chatting, really, just to try and see what we do know for sure, and then what's conjecture and what stories and what bits should we take with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at pictures. I always scan the backgrounds of all behind the scene pictures, hoping to see an APH helmet with a blob of clay in the middle of it, but I've never seen it.
I mean, even the John Molo sketchbooks, are those sketches being drawn while Andrew and Molo are stood having a conversation about it?
Right.
And they're trying to explain it, because there is a beautiful sketch in one of John's books where you can clearly see that it's the APH-6, and then the APH-6 helmet is drawn, and then the mohawk is drawn afterwards, as if to say, this is the helmet, and then we're going to put this piece on.
Right.
It's been drawn by John, but is that coming from Andrew saying, this is what I'm proposing, and he's drawing it to understand what he's trying to tell him? Or is he drawing that to tell him?
I think if I remember right, that picture's dated early, like February 75. I think that's an early... I have to double check that picture, but the one you're talking about, I think the page is dated really early, so I don't think Ainsworth was even in the picture at the point that was drawn.
When we check the John Molo notebooks, we can see that it's early 1976 that these drawings were done, and we don't even think Ainsworth had joined the production at this point in time.
My understanding of it, and again, like you always think, well, that's what I always heard. I heard that originally they did the prototype helmet, to give to John Molo, to give to George Lucas, and that would have had that bit on because it was originally asked for. But then when they realised they stuck that on it with a helmet and a visor and that, you couldn't see the actor underneath, which is fine for the background actors, but for the principals, you need to be able to tell between them. Otherwise, the audience can't engage with it. So I imagine they quickly realised that was going to be a problem.
Well, and it goes back to that Macquarie sketch. The mohawk and the tombstone ears are there. They're in the Macquarie sketch. I think, the APH isn't. So I think maybe once they decided to use the APH, they figured we have to stick, this on there and that on there. I think one more thing that we could say as fact is that they were delivered from Andrew Ainsworth at Shepperton in a just plain raw state with no interiors, no decals, no finish work. They were just basic helmets assembled. Same with the TIE pilots. There were no ear greeblies. There were no cogs. There were none of that. It was just your basic helmet. And I think that goes to, Elstree doing the finish work on the helmets. They're the ones that did all the incredible painting on the X-Wing helmets, and that, the detail and how different they are and all that. And then the TIE pilots, they just slapped a couple cogs on them and sent them to set. But,
you raise a good point, because at some point in time, the X-Wing visors are changed to orange.
Did they?
Yeah, because all the original ones were like a dark tinted grey, smoked. I'm not sure what you want to call them, but they've got the visors have got a black appearance.
I wonder if it's the same color as the
The bubble eyes.
Yeah, the bubble eyes on the tie. I bet you it is.
Mm.
I'll have to look and see.
Which is interesting, because that's another parallel, especially if the X-Wings were made first and then the ties were made towards the end, which is how we believe the production was done.
Okay guys, so let's break it down. What do we know for a fact about the creation of the X-Wing helmet and, by extension, the TIE Pilot helmet? So these are the things I think we can agree on. First of all, the base helmet is the APH-6B, an American Navy helicopter helmet. An artist from the production has been responsible for creating the mohawk, creating the front detailing areas, and as far as the tie goes, creating the ears. Who on the production and how closely related to the production or outside sourced, we don't know. We know that there were only one set of moulds made for the creation of both helmets. Andrew Ainsworth vac forms and assembles all of the helmets and then supplies them back to the art department. All of the helmets are finished by the art department. And I think that's about as much of the history as we can unpick. I hope you found this video interesting, and I hope there was at least something in there that you didn't know and maybe has made you think a little bit more about how Star Wars was made. I'd like to thank Jez Hill from StarWarsHelmets.com for all his help and expert advice. I'd also like to thank Jay TIE Pilot from the TIE Pilot Research Group, which can be found on Facebook. Again, for enlightening us with the information that he's got. Guys like this are a bonus to our community, and it was really great to have them involved in the making of this video. So if you like the video, do give us some feedback. Let us know if you want to see more of this kind of thing. I'm hoping so, because we've really enjoyed refreshing ourselves on the history of the making of Star Wars. So until next time, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you on the next video.